We're live.
You got to get the seats ready, and you're like taking
It's
up
all
the
right.
room.
It's okay. It's okay. It's 11:48 p.m. Nobody's expecting perfection. We're live. This is Mind Your Banners.
Live from the Bahamas into your hearts, right? That's where you're from? That's where you were?
That's where I'm from.
That's where you're from?
I'm from the Bahamas.
You're
After a week there,
Yeah.
I claimed Nassau as my birthright. He's Mike Nislak. I'm Zach Osman. This is Mind Your Banners postgame for Indiana 66, Purdue 0. I don't mean to laugh. I mean,
why are you laughing? What are you laughing at?
It was, listen, I think these last few weeks we've seen so much shuffling in the playoff because teams have not done what they were expected to do. And I understand that it would have taken something really substantial for Purdue to have won this game. But to me, this is like the most emphatic example of, yes, Indiana struggled a little bit with Michigan, a win that looks a little better now that after the Ohio State game, lost to Ohio State. But like a big part of what basically makes the case for Indiana is whenever they have been on the field with a team they were clearly better than, they didn't mess around. They just pushed them aside. And this is obviously the most emphatic example of that.
Well, yeah, let's start. We could talk about the player picture, but let's start with this game. But a stat I didn't even know until it was so lopsided. A stat I didn't even realize until we got to the press conference. Purdue was 0 for 11 on third downs, and their average distance on third down was 0.5 yards. The backup came in at half and basically went backwards. I don't know if they finished the second half with negative yardage. Maybe a couple of they had one late gain there that they had 13 yards in the second half and 3 turnovers in the second half or 4 turnovers in the second half.
It was three in the second half, 5 in the game.
As lopsided, the final score is one thing, but it was even somehow more lopsided when you watch the game in terms of production. The defensive, I went back to 2000. I'm going to have to find a different, go through different box scores to get to the final numbers, but this is the least yardage that Indiana's allowed in any game going back to the year 2000. The second time they've held an FBS opponent to under 100 yards. This was like the Sharks versus the Minnows. I mean, it was so dominant on defense that it looked, and I'm not trying to be flippant, it looked like the Western Illinois game. The difference is Western Illinois was on a 20-whatever game losing streak and was an FCS team. You couldn't have told the difference if you put which team was in the FCS and which team was on a 20. You would have said, I don't know.
And obviously Purdue has better players. I mean, we can assume that. And of course, it's a different point in the season, and seasons like what Purdue has just kind of gone through, they'll weigh on a team, and yes, all that is true.
We have microphones. Is the audio quality not good?
That's from before we started. Okay. These microphones are about the best we can do. They're
Let us know how that sounds.
But no, it's just like I understand. I'm not suggesting Purdue is worse than Western Illinois. I'm guessing if we played Purdue
if you watched the game, you wouldn't know which team
on a neutral field, Purdue would win. But no, on this field today, Indiana treated Purdue like Western Illinois in every conceivable sense, other than I guess missing a field goal,
and in theory,
which is understandable given the conditions. But it's the only difference between Indiana and setting a record margin of victory.
They could have run it up more because they
could have. Yeah,
they didn't at the end of the first half. They took they said we'll just go into halftime up. Was it 28-0?
28-0. Yeah,
and they it's just an incredibly one-sided performance. We haven't even talked about the offense. We could briefly hit on it. Curtis Rourke, you weren't here for this. You were making your way back. He got sacked a couple times earlier. And you're like, they didn't pick up a blitz. Is this going to be more problems? Same thing, but it wasn't. Once they settled down, and what they did on that drive that they got going after the 3-0 to start the game, they did some run plays that they hadn't done. They went to the slot receivers, got them on end arounds with the exact same play.
Yeah,
both broke big gains, and then went to the Wildcat to get the touchdown. And after that, they were in a rhythm the whole game. They could do whatever they wanted. Curtis Rourke threw 6 touchdowns. I think 5 receivers had at least one. Saw some explosive plays. And I think that's the kind of performance you want to put on film for the committee that said they're watching these games, that they want to see, this offense back in a rhythm, because this is what they look like basically all season except for those 6 quarters.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. And listen, results elsewhere, I think the playoff may have basically resolved itself. Texas A&M lost, which means the SEC is kind of cleanly going to be Georgia and Texas. The ACC may get a second team in. Notre Dame is comfortably in at this point. Obviously, Ohio State, I guess, will fall, but I doubt they'll fall out of the playoff.
Before we get to that, since you have some historical perspective, we talked about this. This is the largest win differential between the programs in the program's history. This was the most lopsided win for Indiana. in the series and 2 points away from tying the record overall. Purdue has a 68-point win over
from like
Indiana.
1892.
Yeah. And this is the first shutout for Indiana since 1945. As you kind of trace the evolution of with 10 years on the beat, 11 years.
Yeah, more than that.
But more 10 plus years. I mean, can you talk about kind of the gap between these programs right now? What you saw? I'm just curious your impressions from where it was last year.
My senior year of college, my mom lived in Lafayette at the time, and through her work, she got a couple tickets to the Bucket game, and that was Joe Tiller's last game, and I think that ended 56-7. And I said I'd just go to the game with her because she lived in Lafayette. It was Thanksgiving week. I was going to visit her anyway, and we left at halftime because it was just like, this is just so, and that wasn't a good Purdue team. They didn't go to a bowl that year. Obviously, Indiana didn't either. It was the emotion of Tiller's last game. It was in West Lafayette. You just felt like one team, just absolutely had kind of no resistance, and the other team had something to play for. I think you saw basically that tonight. And I understand that the margin of victory is a little bit greater, but like you asked about history. If we're just talking about two games, there's not an enormous difference between losing by 49 points and 66 points. The point is you were just outclassed in every possible sense. That is what this is. And I have not witnessed Indiana win a bucket game like this. I've seen Indiana win, I guess, 4 bucket games before this one. There was the Austin Starfield goal, the double overtime in 2019, 5, I guess. A couple that were settled by one score, and then a game up in Lafayette, or West Lafayette, that got Indiana the Pinstripe Bowl. It was like 53-35, 54-35, 56-35. So Indiana scored a lot of points on Purdue, but it was very back and forth. I know you and I were talking about, like, is this the widest the gap has been between the two programs competitively? And I think it probably is. I have never seen Indiana just so completely over the hill and far away from Purdue. And that is in kind of everything. Like, if we want to zoom out for a minute, we're not going to go too long tonight, if for no reason other than because I have to get home and relieve my babysitter. But like, it's on the field, yes. And it's in, the coaches' offices, yes. And it's probably in recruiting, although, Purdue was kind of doing pretty well in the late Brom, early Ryan Walters era before the portal became such a substantial thing. But it's also in, like, NIL. It's in sort of a feeling. We'll see what Purdue does with Ryan Walters, and I'm not advocating for firing him or retaining him. But, like, you had a sense a year ago when Indiana lost the bucket game up at Purdue, leaving Ross-Ade Stadium on Saturday afternoon, early evening, whenever that was, Scott Dolson knew what he was going to do. Yeah. Nobody really knows what Mike Babinsky's going to do. And there is, and again, I'm not trying to turn this into the Purdue podcast, but my point is more, it's in the micro. You can see how much better, how far away Indiana is from Purdue.
I mean, all you got to do is look at the box.
But it's also in the macro that, 2 years ago, Purdue, admittedly the product of a favorable division, but 2 years ago, Purdue was in the Big Ten championship game.
Wow.
And it only took Indiana 12 months to turn it around so much that it's hard for me to imagine even like I understand, even with the portal and everything, even a 3 or 4 year plan that would close this gap enough for these programs to feel equal. Now, that can turn very, very easily, but I mean, yeah.
I just thought it was interesting historical perspective because, I mean, just what we saw and the nature of it and the history of these programs. But now we can kind of get to the playoff picture. I think as much as Kurt Stinetti said, I'm not paying attention to that. I think the SMU being ranked ahead of them and the committee kind of spelling out, like, look, SMU's look really good. They're on an 8-game win streak. They've scored all these points. The quarterback looks good. All things you could have said about Indiana 2 weeks prior, but we're like, well, they're not playing good. And I think that it basically said, look, we kind of knew this game was going to be lopsided, but I think that increased the incentive to make it as one-sided and keep those starters in. And I took them out with 10 minutes to go, but he could have taken them out easily.
He could have taken them out in the
third quarter. But so I think
he took them out in the third quarter against Western Illinois.
Yeah, and so he could have easily done that, but I think he couldn't today because I think he knew deep down, and he kind of admitted it. He said style points matter today. We had to do something to show everyone we were back on track, and I think this was the statement they needed. We talked about some of the results that kind of went their way. I view it as like, maybe some people list them as a bubble team. I just don't see it. I think they're in. This is a playoff team.
Yeah, I agree with that. And no, I don't. I don't.
Ice.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody's
If somebody's in that fridge.
Somebody tunneling. Somebody tunneling
knocking
into
that out.
They really want to be on the Postgame podcast. I don't either. And if we want to kind of rough it out at this point, like Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, Indiana, Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, a Big 12 champion, an ACC champion, Boise State or UNLV, Notre Dame, and then I guess depending on how things shake out, I could see most likely a second ACC team.
Yeah, I mean, but I just think the discussions now have moved away.
But my point is, like,
they've moved away from IU versus this team. I think they're going to try to looking for teams to fill that last spot that are deserving. Like nobody's going to jump IU now. That's in that discussion to get that last spot. And so I think you're safe. I still don't think you're hosting a playoff game.
No,
but I think you're solidly in the playoffs. I mean, look, I think that's what you could ask for. I mean, Purdue was obviously not a good team. I don't think there was much you could have done with it other than what you did. And I think that was what you could do this week, and you accomplished the goal. You made yourself
and again
feeling good, I think.
We're having this conversation. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. Texas A&M lost to Auburn. Alabama lost to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. And those teams are better than Purdue. But it's more kind of the idea that like a compelling piece of Indiana's resume to me is that other than Oregon, Indiana is the only team in the country that you can reasonably say every single time it went on the field and was expected to be the superior team, it was. Well, and that's even when it was playing without its starting quarterback at one point. That's even before we had an idea that this was maybe what you could expect of Indiana. That was in a hurricane against Maryland. That was in the snow against Purdue.
I don't remember.
It was Hurricane Helene. Remember, it was coming through Bloomington.
There was a little rain in Bloomington.
It was not a little rain. It was pouring. We got 2 inches that day.
You're like, I walked 10 miles to school. There was some rain on the field. A hurricane. Nobody remembers.
It was.
The committee has not mentioned them playing through a hurricane. I don't think that's on their resume.
It's a hurricane game.
Yeah,
the point is,
let's remember.
Every single time Indiana has been asked to go out and prove that it is clearly that class of team, it has done it without any question. Of course, the committee will also look at Michigan and Ohio State and justifiably dock Indiana some points, particularly for Ohio State. And that's why, as you say, they probably don't have a chance to host. They're probably going to be somewhere in like the 9 to 12 range in terms of seeding. But
I think the punishment for playing a weaker non-conference schedule for losing the Louisville game, that's the not hosting. You don't have a path to host because really their non-conference schedule doesn't stack up against anybody. No. And that's, by far and away. But you can't penalize Indiana for the Big Ten schedule. And that's what they've said throughout this whole the committee process. They said, look, they can only play who's on their schedule. And so, I think you can't, and you, like you said, there's nothing more they could have done in all those games except for that 6-quarter stretch. Mm-hmm. And that's better than anybody out there, like you said, except Oregon. And like everybody's tripped up. Everybody's playing.
If it turns out at some point, whether it's in a first-round game, a neutral site game, whatever, they have another stretch like that and they lose, guess what? Like that's life at the top of college football. Like you're going to lose some games. There's a reason there's literally only one undefeated team in the country right now. It's very hard not to lose. To go a whole season without ever looking bad, without ever looking like the other team is playing better, or you're a little overmatched, or you can't figure it out. Cignetti did say he thought Indiana was better from the Ohio State game, particularly in dealing with the crowd noise. I think that's something that will be borne out as either true or false by basically where they go in the playoff and whether they handle that.
I think they've learned to change what their signal was to make sure teams don't read it. I think there's like a practical thing too. He said like we want to
is it Penn State? Is it Tennessee? Is it Notre Dame? Whatever. Like they're going to get into another environment like that, and Cignetti seems to think his team got what it needed out of the Ohio State loss to be better the next time it's in that sort of setting. Yeah. Because he literally even said, and then after that we'd be in a neutral site, so we wouldn't have to worry about it. But no, I don't think there's any way past this team as
the committee would have to go through all sorts of things to get to document.
It would need a level of mental gymnastics that is not shown, like
that is not done with all the rankings that they've released.
No, not at all.
And so you'd have to change your decision making, how you've done it. And so I think that you got what you needed today. And there's no reason. We saw Mike Kadick. He had a cigar in his hand. He was very happy. The atmosphere and the kind of the players were jubilant, and I think it was well earned. that there wasn't more they could have done today to sort of accomplish. Like I'm just all around impressive.
There have been times in the past where you've seen Indiana players, and probably Purdue players too, but I'm not on the Purdue beat, so I'm not as tapped in there. But Indiana players with cigars celebrating with the bucket, and it's been because they won the bucket. You know, the Xander Diamant photo, famously. There have been other times when they've won the bucket, maybe to get a bowl game, whatever. You did not get the sense that they were celebrating beating Purdue tonight purely. Now, someone like Mike Kadick, yes, because I think it meant a lot to Kadick. You know, when he first got here, Indiana wins that dramatic bucket game in 2019. I think we can all agree that if Indiana and Purdue had played in 2020, Indiana probably would have won that game. And so early in Kadick's career, there was, you know, kind of this, the rivalry was over here where it is now. And then he had to kind of endure those 3 years, and he wasn't, you know, he said something like, I didn't want to feel that way. Wasn't sure he'd come back for this year. So for someone like him, I'm sure this game means a lot. I thought for Indiana more broadly, because like the weight room reeked of cigar smoke.
I think this was the journey. It's celebrating the 11 and 1.
Yes, exactly. I think that it was more. I think it was celebrating Purdue and beating Purdue, but I think it was also celebrating the idea that this is a season that I think all those people know, no matter how much they say, oh, you know, this was the goal at the beginning, whatever. It's very difficult to go 11 and 1 in the Big Ten. It's very difficult to do what Indiana has done, and it is historic what Indiana is almost certainly going to do once the playoff rolls around. And I think tonight was celebrating all of that, not just like Purdue, but not exclusively Purdue.
And before we go, I know you got to get to
I got to get home.
So to me, right now, before we get to the championship games, I think the hosts, Notre Dame's going to be a host. I think whoever loses between Oregon and Penn State is going to be a host.
Yeah.
I think the probably loser of the SEC title game will be a host. And then who do we say? Tennessee.
I think Tennessee or Ohio State.
Or Ohio State.
I would bet Ohio State.
But I mean, do you have a prediction or a preference, sort of like what matchup you'd like to see?
I don't know if I have a matchup like preference.
Like a preference, so like what team would you want to see them match up against? Like, you're interested in seeing a team like a Georgia play.
I'd be very interested.
Or Notre Dame, because it's an in-state game.
I'd be very interested to see them against Notre Dame or Penn State.
That's the team.
Well, because those are the teams that I think Indiana has kind of most closely, I don't want to say resembled, but it's almost kind of been like the arguments for and against Notre Dame and Penn State have not been a million miles away from the arguments for and against Indiana. Notre Dame and Penn State have better wins, but they also have some strength of schedule issues. They also have worse losses, or I guess, well, Penn State's is a worse loss because it was Ohio State at home rather than Ohio State on the road, and obviously Notre Dame is a worse loss. The thing I will say, and I'll sound a little cynical for it, I know the committee says it only looks at it doesn't look at matchups, it only looks at rankings.
Yeah, you said that.
I'm sorry. This is a completely made for television event.
But do you think
if the committee has an opportunity to put together, for example, Indiana at Notre Dame.
I think that's the one that if you're doing matchups for television, like that's probably number one. I don't know that Penn State would be number two. Fred Haviland,
good friend of the
podcast. IU at Georgia would be a fun game. I think that would be interesting, just with all the talk about Georgia and Kirby Smart sort of saying, they should be ranked ahead of everybody, no matter what. And just the idea of an SEC Big Ten and Indiana getting a chance to sort of change all the narratives this season. That to me would be like a fun matchup to see how they stack. SEC versus Big Ten. We've seen the Big Ten competition. Notre Dame, I think, obviously has all that built-in storylines. But I think Georgia would be sort of a lot of intrigue around that game.
I think there would be. The other one that if actually I think more so if we're talking, and I don't know that the seeding would line up the way they would need it to, based on where things are right now. The other one I think that would be interesting would be IU Tennessee. I think that would number one, I think Indiana would win that game.
Such a revenge for the exhibition loss.
Revenge for the Gator Bowl in 2020. No, but I just like it. First of all, I mean, personally, I think Georgia's going to win the SEC championship game, and so they're going to get a bye, and then it's.
So you think it'll be Texas?
Yeah, I think it'll be Texas, but if you're looking for because I think, again, I understand we say we don't look at matchups, we just look at seeding and resumes, but styles make fights. Tennessee, Indiana, I think would be a really compelling game.
Derby said, and Mikel Camara talked about the Ohio State as well of it all, that a rematch. What do you think about that?
I don't think they'd want to do that.
So you think they are looking to actively avoid to try to not only program the best TV matchups,
here's what I would say. I like the TV matchups thing to one side. Like, I think it's worth. I mean, the NCAA selection committee does that with the tournament.
They do.
Yeah, I mean, like I think it's worth trying to avoid that. Like, I mean, that if you're going to have a 12-team playoff, I think one of the features of it should be that we get matchups we don't normally see, and certainly not ones that.
But that would be a knock against Penn State to me too.
Well, but at very least, Penn State and Indiana didn't play each other this year.
Correct.
Like, it's not that compelling to me to see a game that I saw a month ago when there would be so many other options.
So there's not. It doesn't build the storyline to you. It's not like wrestling. We need the blow-off match. You just feel like
you can get the
next later. If they win.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all right, we're gonna shut it down there. Forgive me. I got to get home. It's been a long day.
Just so you know, I was ready to go all night here. We had the podcast, but
I was not because
needs a nappy.
I've been awake for 19 hours.
Needs a nap. The fans want it. 60 fans in here, and they're dying for it. And you're just like, I gotta go. Maybe we should do a live one tomorrow at some point.
I gotta buy a Christmas tree tomorrow. What? Tomorrow night after the kids go to bed? Maybe.
Yeah.
I gotta put in the mother.
All Christmas stuff's already up.
I gotta put in the mother of all expense reports tomorrow too.
For the Christmas tree?
Yes. Yeah, all right. He's Mike Neislick. I'm Zach Osterman. Thank you. And Fred points out it is now December.
Is it really? That's 12:09. All right.
Well, it's playoff season. Thank you so much, all of you, for watching, for listening.
It was a fun season, yeah.
It's not over. I mean,
it's not over, but regular season is. I appreciate everybody that's kind of followed along and had fun with us in these. I mean, they get late, but I mean, we appreciate you all. Every one of you kind of joined the show. It's been fun. It's been fun.
No, it has been a lot of fun. Indiana 66, Purdue 0. Hoosiers are 11-1, 8-1 in the Big Ten. Obviously, that is the end of their regular season. We will see where they go in the postseason, and we will have tons of coverage of all of that at heraldtimesonline.com and indystar.com/sports. Till then, we'll talk to you soon.